Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving headfirst into smart cities, that whole tech-fueled vision of urban life. We've got stacks of research, reports, even a book titled Uneven Innovation to guide us. Because let's be real, sometimes progress takes a detour we weren't expecting.
What's wild is how fast smart city went from a buzzword to everyone's obsession. Feels brand new, but like most overnight successes, the groundwork's been there for ages.
Right, like those stage magic tricks. The audience is wowed, but backstage there's tons of prep work no one sees. And speaking of behind the scenes, why are tech companies so fixated on cities? It's not like they just discovered decent Wi-Fi in the suburbs.
Exactly. And this is where uneven innovation comes in. It's not just, oh, some places get the cool gadgets first. It's how these innovations collide with what's already there. Systems often riddled with inequality. Cities, with all their density and chaos, they become case studies in that clash.
Like building a high-tech penthouse on a foundation that's seen better days. You can have fancy fixtures, but the core issues might still be there. Jennifer Clark, who wrote Uneven Innovation, uses the term liminal space to describe where these smart city projects often end up. What does that even mean in this context?
Great question. Imagine you're at the airport, past security, but not boarding yet. That in-between zone, that's kind of like a liminal space. Clark argues smart cities are stuck in this blurry zone between public service and private interests. A city's job is to serve all its citizens, right? But a tech company, they're all about profit for their shareholders. That tension, it can cause some real problems, especially when you talk about who benefits from all the data being collected.
It reminds me of those dockless bikes and scooters that popped up everywhere a while back. Super convenient, but cities were left scrambling to regulate, figure out safety, accessibility. It was like tech moved at warp speed, but policy was stuck in first gear.
Textbook uneven innovation playing out. It's not just about the tech. It's who sets the rules, who wins, who gets left behind. Imagine building a bullet train, but not considering who could afford the tickets.
So cities become these giant labs for tech companies, right? Experimenting with new ideas. Clark argues that cities end up footing the bill, almost like they're subsidizing these companies without knowing it. Got an example of how that works?
Sure. Think about navigation apps. Those are ubiquitous now. They give us real-time traffic, best routes, super helpful. But what makes them possible? Public infrastructure. Cities built those roads, designed the traffic flow, and now the data is being used by private companies to make bank, often with little direct benefit going back to the cities themselves. Did you know some estimates say these apps using publicly funded traffic data generate billions of dollars each year?
It's like we're all beta testers in this giant experiment, providing valuable data, but not necessarily seeing the rewards. Which makes me think about something you said earlier. We've been down this road before. Smart cities are just the latest chapter in a long line of huge urban makeovers, many of which, well, didn't exactly go as planned.
Exactly. Those massive urban renewal projects of the 60s and 70s, they promised progress, a brighter future. Often, though, it meant displacement, disruption. Some people benefited way more than others. Think about Robert Moses and his controversial legacy in New York City.
Robert Moses, master builder, right. His vision reshaped New York, but not always for the best. Didn't critics say his projects push out working class folks, prioritized cars over public transport, and basically made inequality worse?
Exactly. The technology's different, smart cities are on a different scale, but the danger of repeating those mistakes is real, especially if we prioritize speed and efficiency over thoughtful planning, community input, and actually understanding the social and economic realities on the ground.
So how do we avoid making the same mistakes again, but this time with even higher tech at stake? Clark talks about needing fast policy, but also acknowledges the potential downsides. How do we balance being adaptable with being responsible?
That is the million-dollar question. It's a tightrope walk, no doubt. This fast-paced tech environment means cities need to be flexible, able to adapt quickly. The old ways, with all that bureaucracy and endless planning, they just can't keep up anymore. But, and this is crucial, that speed can't mean ignoring potential consequences, both the ones we want and the ones we don't. It's about being deliberate, even when we're being fast.
So less about hitting the brakes on new tech, more about asking the right questions from the get-go, like who really benefits, what could go wrong, how do we minimize those risks, and maybe the most important one, what do the people living in this city actually want and need?
Now you're talking. Those are the questions we got to be asking loud and clear. Because a smart city, it shouldn't just be about fancy tech, right? It's got to be smart about people, about fairness, about making sure everyone benefits in the long run, not just a select few.
Yeah, well said. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? Clark highlights some cool examples of cities teaming up, forming these urban innovation networks, sharing knowledge, resources, trying to steer this whole tech wave in a more equitable direction. Like they're realizing, hey, we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Think of these networks like support groups for cities, right? Instead of each city on its own, they can connect with others dealing with the same stuff, learn from what worked, what didn't, even work together on projects, pooling resources, know-how, all of it.
Like a smart cities brain trust, cities helping cities. Makes sense, especially since, as you said, cities are often kind of at the mercy of these tech giants, right? With their huge budgets and global reach.
Yeah, there's a real power imbalance there. But these networks, they help even the odds a little. Cities get a platform to speak up for themselves, push back against policies that don't work, even set standards for how this tech gets developed and used. It's about cities taking back some control.
Got any specific examples of these networks in action, like real world stuff where they're making a difference?
Absolutely. Clark mentions a bunch of different models, each with its own thing. You've got groups like Bloomberg Philanthropies with their American Cities Initiative, pouring money into data-driven solutions for city problems. Then there's the Metro Lab Network, connecting universities and cities to collaborate on research. And don't forget the competition-based models, like the National Institute of Standards and Technology, their Global Cities Team Challenge. That one's all about getting cities to try out innovative projects.
It's interesting how these different approaches tackle the problem, right? Some focus on funding, some on research, some on just creating a space to experiment. Sounds like they all want the same thing, though, to give cities more power in shaping their own tech future.
That's the big takeaway. Shifting the power, giving cities a voice, and making sure tech serves people's needs, not the other way around. It's about remembering cities are for people, not just data points on a map.
But even with these networks, there's still that underlying tension, isn't there? Citizens as users of public services versus consumers of private products. And that gets really murky when you're talking about data collection in these smart cities. Where do we even draw the line?
It's a huge issue, no doubt. That line between citizen and consumer is getting blurrier every day. And that has big implications for how we think about data privacy, who owns it, who controls it. Cities are supposed to protect their citizens' data, right? But what happens when that data is being scooped up and used by private companies, often without us really knowing or agreeing to it? Keeps a lot of ethicists up at night, that's for sure.
Right. It's like those terms of service agreements we all click agree on without reading. Those are becoming the rule book for our data, whether we like it or not. But should it be that simple? Should convenience mean giving up control of our digital lives? Feels like a bad trade sometimes.
That's the debate, isn't it? And it's not just about our own privacy. It's about who profits off this data. If our cities are becoming these giant data mines, who's cashing in on the insights from our movements, our habits, everything we do? Is it even a fair exchange?
And are those profits going back into the city, into services that benefit everyone? Or is it just making a few tech companies richer? It's easy to feel powerless against all this.
These are the questions we need to be asking, and that these urban innovation networks are starting to tackle. Because if we're not careful, we can end up with cities that are super efficient, yeah, and profitable for some, but not necessarily fair, sustainable, or even livable. It's about making sure tech serves humanity, not the other way around.
So what can we do about it? I mean, I'm just one person on my phone trying to get where I need to go. What impact can I really have on these big systemic issues? It feels overwhelming sometimes.
You might feel small, but your voice matters, trust me. Remember, cities answer to their citizens, ultimately. And yeah, this stuff with data and smart city policies can feel super complicated. But there are things you can do. Start by getting informed, getting involved.
Like what? Give me some actionable steps. I'm ready to get to work here.
First off, stay informed. Pay attention to what your city's doing, what projects are in the works, who's calling the shots. Ask questions. Go to public meetings, make your voice heard. Don't just take their word for it when they promise amazing tech, demand transparency, demand accountability. Knowledge is power.
Right. So be an engaged citizen. Participate. I can do that.
Exactly. And don't underestimate collective action. Connect with local groups, join online forums, boost the voices of people who are often ignored in these tech conversations. Remember, the future of our cities, it's on all of us. And the more we participate, the better chance we have of creating a future that works for everyone.
Great point. And that ties into something Clark mentions, participatory planning, right? This idea that smart cities shouldn't just be these top-down tech projects, but should actually involve the people they're supposed to serve.
Exactly. The best smart city projects, they get the local context, they get residents involved in the design process, they use tech to address real needs, the priorities of the people who actually live there. It's about using tech to empower communities, not control them. It's about co-creating the future we want to see.
This has been eye-opening. We've covered so much, from what makes smart cities appealing to the potential downsides, the power of those city networks, why citizen engagement is key. It's a lot to take in.
And there's even more to explore. But before we wrap up, let's talk about one last piece of the puzzle. The ripple effects of all this smart city development. Because what happens in those tech hubs, it doesn't stay there.
So we've been laser focused on cities, but Clark throws in this almost ominous note towards the end. She says, even if we don't live in a major tech hub, all this smart city stuff still impacts us. How does that work? It feels like the digital divide is already so big. Are we saying rural communities will be left even further behind?
That's the worry, right? The decisions made in those big cities about how data is used, what infrastructure gets built, even how we define the role of technology in public life. It sets precedents, and those precedents often trickle down, for better or worse, to smaller communities and rural areas. It's like a ripple effect spreading outward.
So it's not just about which city gets the coolest new gadget. It's about these larger questions of digital equity and access playing out on a national, even global scale. What happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas anymore, so to speak.
Exactly. Think about the rollout of broadband internet. Urban areas were prioritized. And while there's been progress in connecting rural communities, the gap persists. Now imagine that same pattern repeating with smart city technologies, autonomous vehicles, sensor networks, AI-powered services. If we're not intentional about equitable access from the start, that gap could widen even further. It's not just about keeping up with the Joneses, it's about having a say in how technology shapes our lives no matter where we live.
And it's not just about access to technology, it's about control, right? If the rules of the game are being written in Silicon Valley and a handful of global cities, what does that mean for the rest of us? Do we just become passive consumers of technology, or do we have a say in how it shapes our communities? It feels like we need a seat at the table.
That's the million-dollar question. And it's why Clark stresses the importance of understanding this as a global conversation. The choices we make now will have far-reaching consequences. And it's not just about technology. It's about power. Who gets to define what a smart city even means? Is it just about efficiency and technological prowess, or should it also encompass sustainability, equity, and a deep understanding of the human experience in cities? These are questions we all need to be asking.
Okay, so I'm hearing a call to action here. What can we do, even those of us who don't live in the heart of the tech world, to make sure this conversation is more inclusive and equitable? How do we make our voices heard?
Well, first, recognize that this is a conversation, not a foregone conclusion. The future of our cities, towns, and communities is still being written. So get informed, engage with local leaders, and make sure your voice is heard. Even small communities can have a big impact by asking the right questions, pushing for transparency, and demanding that technology serves the needs of all residents, not just the privileged few. It's about shaping the future we want, not just reacting to the future we're handed.
It feels like we're at a crossroads here. On one path, we have these shiny new technologies promising a more efficient, connected, maybe even a more sustainable future. But on the other path, we have the potential for increased inequality, data exploitation, and a loss of local control. It's a balancing act for sure.
And the path we choose will depend on the choices we make both individually and collectively. Will we let technology dictate the terms, or will we use it to build a more just and equitable future for everyone? That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves.
I think I know which path I'm choosing. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of smart cities. It's a complex topic, but hopefully this episode has given you some new insights and maybe even inspired you to get involved in shaping the future of your own community. Remember, the future is not something that happens to us, it's something we create together.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and don't be afraid to ask those tough questions, because the future of our cities and our world depends on it.